The engines of Flight 482 roared like a slow heartbeat against the morning sky. The cabin lights dimmed to a soft amber glow as the jet leveled above the clouds, slicing through layers of white and gold. In seat 2A of first class sat Ethan Cole, a man who looked like the world owed him nothing because he already owned most of it. Tailored navy suit, silver watch, calm face that never smiled. His company, Coal Mining Group, controlled diamond operations scattered across southern Africa. The headlines called him the man who turned stone into fortune. He hated flying commercial, but his private jet was undergoing maintenance in Johannesburg, and his infant daughter refused to wait another week. Little Leela Cole, 9 months old, squirmed in his lap, a tiny bundle wrapped in pink fleece. Her nurse, Caroline, sat beside them, whispering lullabies over the hum of the engines. Ethan answered business emails on his tablet, half listening, half existing. Around him, passengers read magazines or dozed. First class smelled of citrus sanitizer and quiet money. Far behind the velvet curtain that divided the cabin, in seat 32B, Taunuru pressed his face to the window. 12 years old. Dark-skinned, wide-eyed, his uniform shirt 2 sizes too big, and his sneakers frayed at the toes. In his backpack rested a bronze medal and a letter sealed with an American crest, the invitation to present his project on portable water purification at a Youth Science Expo in Washington, D.C. He'd never been on an airplane before, never seen clouds from above, never felt air this cold or heard people speak so many accents in one place. The stewardess passing by smiled at him. "First time flying?" He nodded shyly. "Yes, ma'am." "Then congratulations," she said warmly. "You just joined the sky." He grinned, clutching his seatbelt tighter. Across the aisle, a businessman muttered something about kids these days. Tate pretended not to hear. He pulled from his backpack a worn photograph, his mother standing beside a clay hut, her smile bright despite the dust of the village. She'd kissed him that morning in the airport at Dar es Salaam, whispering, "Learn everything you can, my son. One day bring healing home." He'd promised her he would. Hours passed. Above the Atlantic, clouds stretched like endless cotton fields. Flight 482 glided steady and silent. In first class, Lila babbled at the window, pressing her tiny hands against the glass. Ethan glanced up from his tablet, the faintest hint of a smile tugging at his mouth. "Daddy's busy, sweetheart," he murmured, adjusting her blanket. Caroline handed the baby a small piece of fruit puree on a spoon. Lila squealed with delight, smearing it on her face. For the first time that day, Ethan laughed quietly. It was soft, almost reluctant, as if his voice had forgotten how. Far back, Tate traced patterns on the condensation near his window. He was reading an old science magazine someone had left in the airport. One page showed a photograph of surgeons in an emergency ward, performing CPR. He stared at it for a long time. When he was 8, an American NGO had visited his village. They'd trained local families in first aid after cholera outbreaks took dozens of lives. Tay had stood beside his mother every day of that training, watching, memorizing. He could still hear the volunteer's voice. "Never panic, breathe. The human body listens to calm hands." Those words had never left him. He closed the magazine, whispering to himself, "Never panic." In first class, Lila giggled again, her cheeks sticky with fruit. Caroline dabbed her with a napkin while Ethan returned to his spreadsheet. The flight attendants began serving lunch. The soft clatter of trays and utensils filled the air, mingling with laughter from the middle rows. Then, somewhere over the endless blue of the Atlantic, a faint sound rose so small at first that no one noticed. A cough, another, then a choking gasp. Ethan froze, turning toward the noise. His daughter's face had gone red, her mouth open but no sound coming out. "Lila?" His voice cracked. "Lila!" Carolyn lunged, trying to pat the baby's back. Leela's body stiffened, tiny arms flailing. Panic rippled through the cabin. A woman screamed. A man stood up, shouting for a doctor. Ethan's world narrowed to the sight of his child gasping, silent, eyes wide. He couldn't move, couldn't think. The billionaire whose empire spanned continents was powerless before a piece of fruit. In row 32B, Tay heard the commotion. Heads turned toward the front. A flight attendant ran past, voice trembling. Infant in distress. We need medical help. Tay's chest tightened. Without thinking, he unbuckled his seatbelt. The man beside him grabbed his sleeve. Stay down, kid. But the boy was already in the aisle, heart pounding, footsteps steady. He didn't know who the baby was. He didn't know that the man holding her owned mines that glittered under his homeland's soil. He only knew what he'd been taught at 8 years old, under the hot African sun. Never panic. Breathe. The human body listens to calm hands. Tay moved forward, past startled passengers, toward first class, toward the sound of desperation and the life slipping away in a billionaire's arms. The camera would follow him down the narrow aisle, the roar of the engines rising like a drumbeat beneath his footsteps. Fade to black. The alarm in the flight attendant's voice cut through the hum of the engines. Please, we need a doctor. Any medical professional on board? No one moved. A few people stood halfway, then froze a nurse, a man who claimed to know CPR, but both hesitated when they saw the small, purple-faced baby in the billionaire's arms. Ethan's voice cracked. She's choking. Help her, please. Caroline was crying, slapping the baby's back without rhythm. The little body jerked once, twice, then went limp. For an instant, the cabin fell silent except for the roar of air outside. Then, a thin, steady voice broke the spell. Sir, I can help. Every head turned. A boy stood in the aisle, skin dark as midnight, eyes wide but calm. He couldn't have been older than 12. Ethan stared at him, disbelief flashing in his face. What? No. This is my daughter, please, the boy said again, louder this time. Let me try. She doesn't have time. The flight attendant beside him whispered. We've got nothing else. Caroline, trembling, stepped back. Do something. Tay knelt on the carpet in front of the billionaire. His small hands didn't shake. Hold her steady, he said softly. Tilt her forward, yes, like that. He ran a quick glance over the baby, tiny, red, struggling for air, and pressed 2 fingers gently beneath the ribs. Short thrusts, 3, then back blows. Watch. The moves came clean, practiced. The same way he'd learned them under a mango tree years ago, when a nurse had taught his village how to save lives with nothing but calm and courage. 1, he murmured. A thrust. 2, another. 3. He flipped the baby face down across his forearm, delivered firm pats between the shoulder blades. The sound that followed was the sweetest thing Ethan Cole had ever heard, a cough, sharp and wet. A small chunk of fruit hit the floor with a dull smack. Then a breath. A cry. A flood of life returning. Caroline sobbed aloud. The crowd erupted into applause, gasps, and stunned silence all at once. The baby wailed, terrified, but alive. Tay let out a shaky exhale and handed her back. She's okay now, Ethan's voice broke. How did you? She just needed air, Tay said simply. Everyone does. He wiped his palms on his pants, stood slowly, and stepped back, eyes lowered as if embarrassed by the noise around him. The passengers closest to him were whispering, phones out, recording. A man clapped softly. Another woman murmured, "That boy just saved a life." Ethan still couldn't speak. He just stared at the boy's small hands, the metal glinting at his neck, the calm in his eyes. "What's your name?" He finally managed. "Tay, sir. Tay Nuru. Where did you learn that?" "In my village. The doctors came after the war. They taught us first aid." He hesitated, then added quietly, "I remember everything they said. Carolyn kissed the baby's forehead, tears streaking her cheeks. "Thank you," she whispered. "You little angel." The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, the situation has been resolved. Please remain seated. We'll have medical personnel waiting in New York as a precaution." A wave of relief rolled through the plane people, laughing nervously, crying, clapping again. But Tay just nodded, whispering, "She be fine now." He turned to walk back down the aisle, but Ethan caught his wrist gently. "Sit here," he said, pointing to the empty seat beside him. "Please." Tay froze. "Sir, sit," Ethan repeated, softer this time. The boy obeyed, awkwardly setting his backpack on the floor. Lila, still sniffling, reached a small hand toward him. Tay smiled, letting her wrap her fingers around one of his. "You're strong, little one." The baby's tiny hand clung tighter. Ethan watched the two of them, his daughter, alive again, and the child who'd given her that miracle. All the years of boardrooms and diamonds, all the numbers on his screens felt smaller than the quiet scene in front of him. He looked down, voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, son." Tay shook his head. "You don't have to thank me. I just did what someone once taught me to do." The flight attendants began resetting the cabin, murmuring congratulations as they passed. Ethan leaned back, exhausted, his mind a storm of awe and shame and gratitude. He'd come from South Africa with suitcases full of contracts and somewhere between continents. A boy with nothing had reminded him what a life was worth. Outside the windows, the Atlantic stretched forever. Inside, a billionaire and a child sat side by side in silence, one holding the baby, the other holding the truth of why she was still breathing. The jet pushed east through the darkening sky, carrying them toward New York, toward a landing none of them could yet imagine would change all three of their lives forever. For a long while, the plane felt like a church. The applause had faded. Dinner trays were cleared away. The cabin lights dimmed to that hushed blue that lives between day and night. Ethan sat there with his daughter asleep against his chest, her tiny breaths warm against his collar. Every few minutes he glanced down just to make sure her chest kept rising and falling. Beside him, Tay sat straight, hands folded in his lap, eyes fixed on the stars outside the window. The two of them had not spoken since the chaos ended. The only sound was the soft thrum of the engines and the gentle hum of life starting again. Finally, Ethan broke the silence. "Do you fly often, Tay?" The boy smiled, shy but proud. "This is my first time, sir." "First time?" "Yes. I almost didn't believe they would let me." "It still feels like a dream." Ethan studied him. His voice was quiet. "You handled yourself better than most adults I know." Tay shrugged. "Where I come from, sir, when someone can't breathe, you don't wait for someone else. You just help." He said it so simply that it stung. Ethan looked out at the clouds. "Where do you come from?" "From Tanzania." "Near Mbeya?" Ethan frowned slightly. "That's far inland." "Yes, sir. My village is small. We have mountains and dust and the best sunsets in the world." He grinned softly. "And goats, many goats." Ethan chuckled in spite of himself. "And you're flying to Washington for a science contest?" "Yes, sir. I won the National Science Olympiad. I made a filter that cleans dirty water using only sand and charcoal." "Water?" Ethan asked, half to himself. "Yes, because in my village, clean water can be harder to find than diamonds." The words landed heavy. Ethan swallowed. "I see." Tay didn't notice the shift in his tone. He kept talking, excited now. "There was an American foundation that helped our school people who came to teach science, medicine, computers. I liked helping them. One of them was a nurse. She said I had good hands. She's the one who taught me CPR." He looked down at his small fingers, still red from the pressure he'd used earlier. "She told me, Tay, these hands can save lives one day." I didn't believe her. He smiled softly. "Now I think maybe she was right." Ethan's throat tightened. He looked at his daughter again, sleeping peacefully, unaware that she had nearly left the world. She was very right, he murmured. They sat in silence again for a while. Then Ethan said, "Do you want to be a doctor?" Tay nodded. "Yes, sir. I want to learn everything I can. Then go home and build a clinic. So no one has to lose family just because the hospital is too far." Something inside Ethan's chest shifted. He had spent decades extracting value from the ground of Tay's continent diamonds, contracts, the kind of wealth that came with security guards and isolation. He had never thought about what those places looked like after he left. He glanced at the boy. "Your mother must be proud." Tay's smile faded a little. "She will be. When I call her." Ethan hesitated. "You don't have a phone?" "The one the school gave me broke." "It's okay. I'll write her an email when we land. The teacher said I can use the internet at the hotel." Ethan stared ahead, ashamed of how foreign that sentence sounded to him. Tay turned toward him. "Do you have other children?" "Just her," Ethan said, nodding to the sleeping baby. "She's lucky," Tay said gently. "You must love her very much." "I do," Ethan said. Then, after a pause, "But I don't think I've been very good at showing it." Tay tilted his head. "You came for her when she cried. That's what a father is supposed to do." "No," the boy said quietly. "That's what a good father does." Ethan didn't reply. The simplicity of the statement sank deep. A flight attendant appeared, offering drinks. Ethan ordered water. Tay declined. When she left, Ethan reached into his briefcase and pulled out a small box of chocolates. "You eat these?" Tay's eyes lit up. "I've seen them on TV." Ethan smiled and handed him one. The boy bit into it carefully, as if tasting a piece of another world. "Good?" Tay nodded. "Sweet, but strange. In my country, we like sweet things that come from the ground like sugarcane." Ethan looked at him. "You know, my company Coal Mining, we operate in South Africa. Not far from where you live, really." "I know the name," Tay said quietly. "They build the big roads. People say they make the country rich." Ethan opened his mouth, then closed it again. There were too many truths tangled inside that statement to explain at 30,000 feet. Instead he asked, "Have you ever seen a diamond, Tay?" The boy laughed. "No, sir. We dig for water, not for jewels." Ethan smiled faintly, but the irony didn't escape him. The cabin lights dimmed further. Passengers began to sleep. Lila stirred, whimpering softly. Tay reached for a napkin, dipped it in his glass of water, and handed it to Ethan. "For her lips. They get dry." Ethan accepted it, carefully dabbing the baby's mouth. "Thank you." He looked at the boy's face, now framed by the soft light from the window. "You remind me of someone I used to know." "Who?" "Myself. Before I started believing I had everything to lose." Tay smiled. "Maybe you still have everything to find." The engines hummed below them. For the first time in years, Ethan felt something gentle move inside his chest, a quiet shift from guilt to wonder. He thought about the mines, the headlines, the numbers. Then about this child, who had nothing but hope and still managed to carry more grace than all the men in Ethan's boardrooms combined. He whispered, "You saved her life, Tay. But I think maybe you saved mine too." The boy blinked, confused but smiling. "I didn't mean to, sir." Ethan chuckled softly. "That's the only way it ever happens." Outside, the Atlantic glowed beneath the moonlight, endless and still. The billionaire and the boy sat side by side, two strangers stitched together by a single breath, one that had changed everything. The seatbelt sign chimed faintly above them, and the camera would drift back through the dark cabin, past rows of sleeping faces, before fading into dawn light through the windows. Morning stretched across the Atlantic like a sheet of gold. By the time the plane began its descent, the sky outside had turned a pale orange. The city appeared far below New York, glittering like a promise on the horizon. Tay pressed his forehead to the window, eyes wide. He'd never seen buildings that tall, never imagined a place so dense it seemed to breathe. He whispered under his breath, "So many lights." Ethan glanced at him, amused. "Wait till you see it up close. The city never sleeps." Tay smiled. "Then it's like the stars forgot to go home." That line lingered in the air. Ethan found himself smiling, not the kind he used for interviews or cameras, but one that actually reached his eyes. Lila babbled from his lap, chewing on her blanket. The nurse Caroline watched her closely, still shaken by what had happened hours before. Every time Lila coughed, her eyes flickered with fear, and every time Tay looked over, she relaxed again. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be landing at JFK International in approximately 20 minutes. Please fasten your seatbelts and return your trays to the upright position." The flight attendants moved down the aisles, smiling but tired. News had already spread through the plane. People leaned over seats, whispering, "That's the boy," or "He's the one who saved the baby." Tay pretended not to notice. He pulled his backpack onto his knees and zipped it shut. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the weight of the night settling in. Ethan leaned closer. "You okay?" "Yes, sir. Just thinking about home." "My mother will worry if she sees the news." Ethan frowned. "News?" The boy nodded toward the passengers snapping photos on their phones. "They filmed it." Ethan exhaled slowly. "Of course they did." He reached for his phone, then paused. For once, he didn't care about headlines or PR. There were no statements to draft, no narratives to control. There was only a child, a breath, and the truth of what had happened. As the plane touched down, applause broke out again. Not for the pilot this time, but for the small miracle that had occurred somewhere over the Atlantic. When the doors opened, airport staff and medics waited near the gate. Carolyn carried the baby toward them, explaining what had happened. The nurse in charge smiled. "She's fine, sir, just scared. You got her here in time." Ethan turned to thank her, but his eyes were on Tay. Reporters had already gathered beyond security. Someone must have leaked the story from on board. Billionaire's baby saved mid-flight by African prodigy. Cameras flashed as they stepped into the terminal. Ethan shielded his daughter's face, muttering, "Unbelievable." Microphones swung toward them. "Mr. Cole, can you tell us what happened? Is it true a boy saved your daughter's life? Who is he?" Tay froze. The crowd, the noise, it all felt too big. Ethan placed a steady hand on his shoulder. "Stay close, Tay." He turned to the press, his tone calm but firm. "What happened on that flight belongs to one person, the boy who saved my daughter's life. If you're going to tell a story, tell his." A murmur swept through the crowd. Tay lowered his gaze, embarrassed. "I didn't do it for that, sir. Please don't make a scene." Ethan looked down at him. "You think I'm doing this for me?" He gestured toward the cameras. "This world listens to people like me. But maybe it's time it starts listening to people like you." He turned to the reporters again. "This young man is the reason my child is alive. He learned first aid from humanitarian workers in his village. Without them, she wouldn't be here. Maybe instead of asking me for statements, you should ask why a 12-year-old knows more about saving lives than most of us do." The words hit the room like a stone in water. The questions stopped. The cameras lowered. For the first time in his life, Ethan Cole had said something that didn't make him richer, just better. After the crowd cleared, an airline representative approached them with a wide smile. "Sir, the hotel transfer is ready. And for you, young man," she added, turning to Tay, "the Science Expo Committee sent a car. They're expecting you at the conference center this afternoon." Tay blinked. "They know I'm coming?" "They do now," she laughed. "Looks like you're famous." He looked at Ethan nervously. "I didn't mean for all this to happen." Ethan placed a hand on his shoulder. "Good things usually start by accident." He pulled a card from his jacket pocket and wrote something on the back. "This is my number. My assistants too. You'll need help while you're here, flights, translators, anything. Promise me you'll call. Tay took the card carefully, as though it were fragile. Thank you, sir. Ethan crouched slightly, balancing the baby on one arm. You don't have to call me Sir, Tay. Call me Ethan. The boy hesitated, then smiled shyly. Okay. Ethan. Good, Ethan said softly. Now go make the world listen to you. The car waiting for Tay was old but comfortable. As it pulled away, he looked back through the window. Ethan stood at the curb holding Lila, watching until the car disappeared into traffic. Inside the baby's tiny fist was the edge of Tay's seat tag, which she had grabbed and refused to let go of when they said goodbye. Ethan chuckled under his breath. You're right, sweetheart, he whispered. We're not letting him go either. That evening, Ethan couldn't focus on anything. His meeting schedule sat untouched, his emails piled up. He kept replaying the same image, Tay kneeling on the airplane floor, steady hands saving a life while everyone else froze. In that small act, he saw every failure of his own empire. He saw villages that supplied his mines without medicine. He saw the gap between his wealth and the world that boy came from. By midnight, he had made a decision. He called his head of philanthropy. Get me the contact for that NGO in Tanzania, the one that trained medical volunteers. I want to talk to them. Tomorrow, the assistant stammered. Sir, that's... Sudden, Ethan smiled faintly. So was the miracle that got my daughter breathing again. He looked out the hotel window toward the skyline, lights flickering like veins of gold across the city. Somewhere out there, a boy was walking toward his future. And for the first time, the billionaire realized he was walking toward his too. 3 weeks later, the news had already faded from the headlines, but the moment hadn't faded from Ethan Cole's mind. Every night when he came home, he found himself standing by Lila's crib, watching her sleep, her small chest rising and falling, steady as waves. Sometimes he still heard that silence, the one when she couldn't breathe, and every time he did, his heart whispered the same name, Tay. He had told his team to track down the NGO that had trained the boy. It wasn't hard. There weren't many organizations doing medical training deep in rural Tanzania. The next morning, Ethan's private jet landed on a red dust airstrip surrounded by acacia trees. The air was dry, sweet, and heavy with memory. As he stepped out, he saw children running barefoot through the tall grass, laughing, waving at the plane. A woman in a faded blue headscarf stood waiting near an old truck. You must be Mr. Cole, she said, smiling. Welcome back to Africa. Her name was Dr. Rachel Meyer, the American volunteer who had run that first aid program years ago. Ethan shook her hand. You taught a boy named Tay Nuru? Her eyes softened instantly. Of course. I remember that kid, smartest 12-year-old I've ever met. He used to take notes for his mother and then teach the younger kids what he learned. He saved my daughter's life. Rachel froze, blinking back emotion. He did? And nodded. At 30,000 feet, the doctor covered her mouth. Oh my God. I'm here because I want to help, he said simply. Not with donations that disappear into the air. I want to build something that lasts. She studied him, cautious. People say that all the time. I mean it, Ethan said. And I have the resources to prove it. They drove for 2 hours through red roads and thorn trees until they reached a small village mud houses. Children fetching water, goats grazing by half-broken fences. It wasn't poverty that struck Ethan the most. It was the absence of choice. This is where Tay grew up, Rachel said quietly. They stopped at a one-room clinic built of brick and tin. Inside, a nurse was bandaging a child's arm while another woman mixed medicine in a cup. Ethan stepped in and looked around. The room was clean but bare, no machines, no proper beds, just determination. How do you treat emergencies? He asked. Rachel sighed. We improvise. Sometimes we have power. Sometimes we don't. When a child can't breathe, we do what we can with our hands. Ethan's throat tightened. He saw it all again, Tay's hands, calm and sure in the chaos of that plane. He turned to Rachel. "What if I built you a real clinic, with staff, equipment, ambulances? A place to train hundreds of children like him?" Her eyes widened. "You're serious. Call it repayment," he said softly. "For a debt I can't measure." Months later, construction began. Bulldozers cleared ground where weeds once grew. Architects flew in. Foundations were poured. The new Kolnuru Medical Center rose slowly under the sun. Ethan returned often, standing beneath the scaffolding in his rolled-up sleeves, watching workers pour cement and children watch from the fence. Word spread. The billionaire who had built his empire from the earth was now giving something back to it. He launched a scholarship fund for African students pursuing science and medicine, calling it the Breath Initiative, in honor of the miracle knitter. At the press launch in Dar es Salaam, a journalist asked him, "Why invest in this after all these years?" Ethan smiled faintly. "Because I met a boy who reminded me that the world doesn't change with money. It changes with moments and the courage to act in them." Meanwhile, in Washington, D.C., Tay was making headlines of his own. He had presented his invention, an improved water filtration prototype, to the Science Expo judges and won first place. Photos of him holding the trophy, shy smile and all, spread across social media under the headline, "The boy who saved a billionaire's baby wins science gold." He became the youngest recipient of a scholarship sponsored by the newly formed Breath Initiative. The news reached Ethan the same day the clinic's roof was finished. He read the article 3 times, unable to stop smiling. That night, he called Rachel. "Find his mother. Tell her son's going to college. Anywhere he wants." "You're sending him abroad?" she asked. "I'm sending him as far as his heart can go," Ethan said. Months later, a letter arrived at Ethan's Manhattan office. The handwriting was neat, careful. "Dear Mr. Ethan, I don't know how to thank you. My mother cried when she heard I can study. She says God hides angels in strange places. Maybe that's true. I will not waste what you gave me. I want to learn medicine and come back home to help children like my sister, who died when the clinic was too far. If one life can change another, maybe that's how we heal the world, one breath at a time. Your friend, Tay Nuru." Ethan read the letter over and over. He kept it in his wallet, right behind a photo of his daughter. A year later, the Kolnuru Medical Center opened its doors. Rachel stood beside Ethan as the ribbon was cut. The clinic gleamed white under the sun, solar panels glinting on the roof. Dozens of children ran in and out, peeking at the new hospital beds and shiny monitors. Inside, murals painted by local artists showed figures dancing, holding hands, breathing freely. Ethan looked up at the largest mural above the entrance, an image of two hands reaching for each other. One small, one large. Beneath it were words in Swahili. "He who gives breath, gives life." He closed his eyes and smiled. Somewhere he imagined Tay studying late at night under a Harvard lamp. The same calm focus that had once filled an airplane now building a future. For the first time in years, Ethan Cole felt whole. 10 years later, Boston in early spring smelled like rain and coffee. The courtyard of Harvard Medical School was dotted with families holding flowers, cameras, and pride that could move mountains. Among the sea of black gowns stood a tall young man in a crimson hood, calm, steady, radiant, Dr. Tay Nuru. His mother had flown in from Tanzania for the ceremony. She sat in the front row, wrapped in a bright yellow kitten scarf, her eyes shimmering with tears she didn't bother to wipe away. When his name was called, the applause came like thunder. Students cheered louder than usual. Many already knew his story, the boy who had saved a billionaire's child mid-flight and then used that miracle to change countless lives. But to Tay, it wasn't a story. It was simply the journey home. He walked across the stage, shaking the dean's hand. Cameras flashed. And as he stepped down, his eyes found a familiar face in the crowd. Older, grayer, still sharp but softer around the edges. Ethan Cole. Beside him stood Lila, now 11 years old, her hair braided neatly, clutching a bouquet of lily almost as big as she was. She grinned the moment she saw him. Tay's chest tightened. He smiled back, wide and unguarded, the kind of smile that said everything has come full circle. After the ceremony, under the blooming cherry trees, they met again. Ethan looked at him for a long moment before speaking. "You look taller than the last time I saw you." Tay laughed. "I was 12, sir. It was bound to happen." Ethan smiled. "You can drop the sir now. You've earned at least a first-name basis." "Fine," Tay said, grinning. "Ethan." Layla ran forward and hugged him around the waist. "Mom says you're the reason I'm here," she said proudly. He crouched down. "No, little one. You're the reason I kept going." Ethan's throat caught. He turned away for a moment, pretending to fix his tie. When he looked back, he held out a small envelope. "Before you fly home, there's something I want you to have." Tay hesitated. "You've already given me too much." "This isn't a gift," Ethan said softly. "It's a continuation." Inside the envelope was a single document, a deed. At the top it read, "The Nuru Cole Foundation for Global Health Research." Ethan spoke quietly. "It's yours to lead. A joint partnership between Harvard and the medical center in Tanzania. You'll run the program from both sides of the ocean, training doctors there, sending students here. A bridge, built from what you started." Tay stood speechless. "Ethan, I don't know what to say." "Say you'll keep breathing life into people who've forgotten they can." Tay's eyes filled with tears. He extended his hand, but Ethan ignored it and pulled him into a hug. "I owe you everything," Ethan whispered. "You already paid it forward," Tay replied. "Now it's my turn." That evening, the three of them walked along the Charles River. The city lights shimmered on the water like scattered diamonds. Lila skipped ahead, collecting fallen petals from the walkway, while the two men walked side by side, no longer billionaire and boy, but equals connected by gratitude and purpose. Ethan said quietly, "I used to think value was measured in what you take from the earth. Now I know it's measured by what you give back." Tay nodded. "You gave the world something that doesn't fit in numbers, Ethan." "And what's that?" "Hope," Ethan smiled, looking out at the city. "You gave it first." A month later, they all flew back to Tanzania for the 10th year anniversary of the Cole Nuru Medical Center. The once bare hills were now dotted with clinics, schools, and solar panels gleaming under the African sun. Children played outside, their laughter ringing through the air. At the ceremony, Ethan took the stage with Lila and Tay beside him. He spoke softly into the microphone, his voice breaking on the wind. 10 years ago, a boy saved my daughter's life. I thought that was the miracle. But the real miracle was what he taught me, that one act of courage can echo farther than any fortune ever will." He turned to Tay. "Because of him, thousands of children will breathe easier, live longer, and dream bigger. That's not charity. That's justice." Applause swept through the crowd. Lila, standing beside her father, took the mic shyly. "Dr. Tay," she said, "I don't remember what happened on the plane. But Daddy told me I was really small, and you gave me a second chance. So I wanted to say thank you. For giving him one too." The audience gasped softly, and Tay had to look away to hide the tears in his eyes. He knelt down, smiled at her, and said, "Then let's both keep using it." That night, long after the speeches and photographs, Tay stood alone at the edge of the new clinic. The moonlight painted the fields silver. He could hear laughter from the village below, music playing faintly from a radio. Footsteps crunched behind him. Ethan joined him, holding 2 cups of tea. "Hard to believe," Ethan said. 10 years, it feels like yesterday," Tay replied. "You know, I still remember your words on the plane," Ethan said. "Everyone needs air," Tay chuckled softly. and you gave it back to a whole continent. They stood in silence, sipping tea, watching the night stretch wide. Finally, Ethan said, "When I die, I hope people don't talk about my company. I hope they talk about this." "They will," Tay said. "Because this breath won't stop with us." Ethan smiled faintly. "No, it won't." The camera would slowly pull away. Two figures standing side by side beneath the vast African sky. One who once held the world, and one who taught him how to hold it gently. The wind rustled the tall grass, carrying the faint laughter of children and the distant hum of a generator powering light in homes that once lived in darkness. Somewhere in that sound was the rhythm of a heartbeat. Steady, strong, eternal. Fade to black. "The chair took my legs," Ethan once said in another life. "But this boy's hands gave me back my breath." Fade out. The end.